Okay, everybody, here is our review for test number 3. It's on units 5, 6, and 7. We will obviously start with you guessed it, unit 5. We'll go through the text now, and then after going through the text, we'll go through a couple of the interesting things that we saw in turn when we analyzed the text. Everything that we're going to discuss in this review is fair game for the test, and everything we're going to discuss in this review was discussed in class. Let's read through the psukim first. These psukim discuss a conversation between Moshe Rabbeinu and Chovav, his relative. Moshe Rabbeinu is trying to convince Chovav. Again, some people say this Chovav person is Yitro, some people say it's not Yitro. Trying to convince this Chovav relative of his to come to them to Bnei Yisrael. Vayomer Moshe leChovav ben Ruel Hamidjani chotein Moshe. So Moshe said to Chovav, the son of Ruel Hamidjani, who was chotein Moshe, who was the son-in-law of, either the father-in-law, perhaps the brother-in-law of Moshe. What does Moshe say to him? No, simanachna, we are traveling on Makom Asher Amar Hashem, to the place that Hashem said. O toetin lachem, that Hashem said, I will give it to you. So what does he suggest? L'cha itanu. He says, come with us, travel with us. Ve'itabnu lach, and we will do good to you. Why? Ki Hashem diber tov al Yisrael, because Hashem spoke to do good for Bnei Yisrael. Vayomer elav, so Chovav says to him, Lo elech, I will not go. Ki im el artzi ve'el moladati elech. Rather to my land and my birthplace I will go. So that's part A. So Moshe Rabbeinu says, come with us. He says, no thank you, I'm going to go back home. Vayomer al na ta'azov otanu. So now, second time around, he says, al na ta'azov otanu, please do not leave us. Why? Ki al kain yadata chanotenu b'midbar. You're important to us. Why? Ki al kain, because yadata, you know, chanotenu b'midbar. You know the way that we camped in the desert. V'hayita lanu le'inayim. You could be eyes for us. Somehow you could be helpful for us. Now if you go with us, the good that Hashem does for us, we'll do that same good for you. So Moshe kind of ups the ante. First he just says, hey tabnulach, I'll do good, we'll do good for you. The second time it's the same good that I will do for you. Okay? So again, we have, here is the request, up to l'cha itanu, vehi tabnulach is right there, that's the bribe, the first bribe at least. And then the reason for that, right, the reason we'll give you good is because, well, Hashem promised good for the Jewish people. Fine. And then again, that's his response. I'm going to go back home. And then Moshe starts again with the second plea, don't leave us. He gives us a reason why. And then he says, it's even better this time. The good that is being done to us, you will get. So what happens? So, and we don't actually hear Chovav's response. That's actually it. So it goes from Chavtet through Lamed Bet, and we are not told Chovav's response to Moshe Rabbeinu's second request. So now let's point out a couple of interesting things that we saw in the text. The first thing we saw was there was a milah mancha here, and that was the shoresh tov. Tov meaning good. Let's make that a little thinner. Okay, but that's the first one. Vehei tavnulach. Here we go. So we have vehei tavnulach. It will be good for you. Hashem diber tov al Yisrael. And he says again down here, hatov ahu asher yetiv Hashem imanu vehei tavnulach. An emphasis on the word tov, an emphasis on the good. Now, why that is, we discussed possibilities in class. We discussed the possibility that it's a contrast. That even though it's so good, still he doesn't want to go. Some say no, it's to emphasize how good it was for Bnei Yisrael at the time. There was such good going on with Bnei Yisrael to contrast it with the bad things that's going to go on later on. So those are two possible explanations. So why tov? So possibility number one is, possibility number one of tov, one second. Sorry about that. So possibility number one of tov is just to, is as a contrast to how bad it gets later. That's possibility number one for what tov could be. Possibility number two is to teach us that even though, I'm not going to write the whole thing because I'm going to run out of space, even though even though it's so good, sorry about that, even though it's so good, still Chovav does not want to come. That's possibility number two, about why we're emphasizing tov here. Okay, something else that we saw that was interesting was the word that was used to say with us. The first time Moshe says the word, he says, "Lacha itanu," come with us. He uses the word itanu. The second time he says imanu, with us as well. So why does the Torah use two different words which are synonyms? So say itanu both times. Why is it telling us this? So we pointed out that the word itanu and the word imanu mean two different things. The word itanu, I'll just draw an arrow here. Okay, the word itanu, okay, means with us, but not as. Actually, no, it was not as important. Right? You're not as important as us. You're going to come, you're going to be a part of us, right? But you're not going to be as important as us, which is exactly what the pasuk says. Why will you get good? We will do good for you. Why? Ki Hashem diber tov al Yisrael. Because God does good for Israel, so therefore, since you'll be with us, you'll get the good too. But not that you are deserving for the good on your own. The second time around, Moshe Rabbeinu says no. Moshe Rabbeinu says imanu. And we said imanu means with us, but also, whoops, we'll use the other same color there just to keep it even, okay, important, okay, that says important, in your own right. So the first time, again, Moshe Rabbeinu says, come itanu, come with us, but come itanu. Itanu meaning with us, but you're not going to be as important as us. You'll be like secondary to us, right? That's why it's only because the Ber Tov Yisrael, because Hashem promised good for the Bnei Yisrael. The second time, right, imanu with us, right, which is the normal way, right, which means you'll be with us, but you'll be with us and you'll be important in your own right. That is more of a reason for Chovav wanting to come, showing that a little bit about what's going on here in the story is the fact that where Bnei Yisrael are traveling. They're traveling to a place to make themselves, they're leaving where they normally are, and they want to feel like they have an identity where they're going to. And someone like Chovav, who's joining up with Bnei Yisrael on his own, he might feel a little bit like, who am I? I'm going to feel like I don't have a place here. That's why the second time Moshe Rabbeinu says, no, you'll be important in your own right. Telech imanu. Okay, now we're going to move on to Unit 6, which is now the account of Bnei Yisrael starting to travel away from Har Sinai, Midbar Sinai, from that whole area. Okay, so whether Chovav comes or not, we don't know. Now let's see Bnei Yisrael starting to move on. So let's read the Psukim. So Bnei Yisrael says, Vayis'u mehar Hashem, they traveled from God's mountain, derech shaloshe yamim, a 3-day journey, va'aron brit Hashem nosei lifnehem, and the Aron Kodesh, which is the Aron Brit Hashem of the covenant of the, right, which had the Luchot HaBrit in it, nosei lifnehem, traveled before them, derech shaloshim, again, a 3-day journey. Why? Latur lahem menucha, to find a place for them, to scout out a place for them to rest, to camp. The anan Hashem alehem yomam b'nasam min hamachaneh, and the cloud of God was above them during the day as they traveled. Then what happened? Vayhi bin soha Aaron vayomer Moshe, and it was when the Aaron lifted up to go, Moshe would say, Kuma Hashem, arise Hashem, v'yafutzu avecha, scatter our enemies, v'yanusu misanecha yipanech, those that hate us should run away from you. Uvenucho yomar, when the Aaron rested, they would say, Moshe would say, Shuva Hashem, return Hashem, revavot alfei Yisrael. Amongst the crowds, the tens of thousands of the Revot Alfei Yisrael, the tens of thousands, the hundreds of thousands of Bnei Yisrael, among the multitudes of Bnei Yisrael. So again, this was a tefillah that Moshe would say. First, he'd say when they started moving, destroy our enemies, and when they rested, it was Hashem, you should dwell amongst us, basically in peace. Now, before we get into the whole inverted backwards nun situation, which is better visible, we'll see on a later slide. First, there were some interesting things about the text just that came up from before we get to there, right? We pointed out, why does it say, right, derech shalosh yamim, right? What's with the word derech shalosh? Just say that the Aaron traveled 3 days. Why a journey of 3 days? We saw Rashi's comment. How does Rashi explain? Derech shalosh yamim, mahale shalosh yamim halchu b'yom echad. It was a distance of 3 days, but they traveled it in 1 day. Why? The Holy One, Hashem, wanted to bring them to Eretz Yisrael immediately. Right? So where do we get that from? We get that from the fact that it says Derech Shalosh Yamim. Derech Shalosh Yamim is not a time frame, it's a distance. It's the distance of 3 days. Why a distance? To say it traveled 3 days, it's telling us that they covered that distance in less than 3 days. Why would the Torah be telling us this? Because the Torah is telling us that it was miraculous, says Rashi. It was miraculous they covered that 3-day journey in just one day, because God wanted to take them into Eretz Yisrael as soon as possible. Again, like we saw before, the idea of Tov, there are a lot of good things happening, right, to contrast to about what's about to happen. And now we get to the inverted nuns. Again, if you take a look at what it looks like in the Sefer Torah, you have these nuns that basically bracket in the parsha of Vayihi ben Soharon around the fact of we have Bnei Yisrael right? This is Bnei Yisrael, right? Bnei Yisrael traveling, okay? Bnei Yisrael traveling. Okay, they're leaving Har Sinai, and then of course we have the mitonanim. Okay, we have the complaining. Okay, so in between the complaining and in between the Bnei Yisrael traveling and Bnei Yisrael complaining, we have this parsha of Vayihi ben Soharon with these weird inverted nuns. And the question is, what's the point of these nuns? What are they trying to show us? Why does the Torah have it like this? We never see this anywhere in the Torah. What's the point? So look at Rashi. So Rashi tells us the following. Hashem made marks for us in this passage, right? These are simanim, these are signs. Why? To indicate to us that it is not in its proper place, right? Vayihi ben Soharon does not belong here. It comes from somewhere else. So then why is it here? To make a break between one punishment and the next. One bad thing happening. One thing where Bnei Yisrael were punished, right? We see that in Masechet Shabbat. Okay. So what were these two bad things? So the second one is the obvious one. Vayihi am kimitonin, and Bnei Yisrael start to complain. Right? What's the first bad thing? The first thing that shows up is just Bnei Yisrael traveling. So why is that viewed as being a bad thing? So for that, we're going to look at Ramban. And Ramban tells us what we know, starts off by telling us what we know. The second bad thing that happened that we're trying to separate is that it says that people were complaining. The first is that which it writes, and they traveled from Har Hashem, the mountain of God. Rav Chanina says they strayed from God like a child running from school. They said, maybe God will give us more mitzvot. So the first time it says that they traveled, they weren't just traveling. It was a bad thing they were doing. What were they doing? They were running away from God. They said, we don't want God to give us more mitzvot anymore. And we actually see this directly in the Pasuk, because the Pasuk says, Vayis'u mehar Hashem. It doesn't say they traveled from Har Sinai. It says they traveled from the mountain of God. It's because it was God's mountain they were traveling from, because they were actually trying to travel from God. Not just Har Sinai, not a location. They weren't just moving on. They were traveling away from God. This seems to show us they were trying to basically run away from mitzvot. Sorry if that's messy, but that's basically what it says, right? They're running away from mitzvot, as Ramban tells. So again, if you look at, Vayihi ben Soharon, like we saw before, so here's the parsha of Vayihi ben Soharon, bracketed in by these two nuns, and it's to separate from the first part, which is Bnei Yisrael running away from Har Hashem for mitzvot, and of course, the mitonanim, the complaining. We don't want these two things to be back to back. That's what Rashi and Ramban help us understand why Vayihi ben Soha is here, and because it's out of place, the Torah puts these two nuns to separate and show this is not where it normally would belong. One thing we pointed out about this that was interesting is the following question: why are these two things separated? There are plenty of times in the Torah where there are two bad things that are back to back. Yet somehow here, for whatever reason, the Torah feels the need to separate between these two things. The idea of Bnei Yisrael running away and the Bnei Yisrael complaining. Why are we trying to separate between those two bad things of all bad things? So in class we said the following idea, the following explanation. The first bad thing was Bnei Yisrael is running away from God. Obviously that's a bad thing. No one wants to say that running away from Har Sinai mitzvot is a good thing. But on the other hand, it's a natural, normal human reaction to feel overwhelmed by mitzvot, to feel like, I've done a lot and there's plenty of mitzvot and I'm overwhelmed by religion and I want to get out of here. That's a normal reaction. However, if we were to put running away directly connected to the parsha of complaining, right, we would say the feeling of running away should lead to you to complain, right? You feel like you want to run away, what should that lead to? Complaining. However, what we want to do is separate those two things and say the following. No. In fact, we don't want to tell the feeling that you want to run away should not feel like lead to the feeling that you want to complain. It should not feel like we want to get out of here. There's something wrong with religion. It's a normal, natural human feeling. So normally we don't mind having two bad things together in the Torah back to back. Right? Those things happen. But here we want to point out that running away should not lead to complaining. That there's a feeling that you want to get out of religion that is overwhelming is a normal feeling. That should not lead you to complain and say, I want out. That's the point we were trying to make. And that's the point the Psukim are trying to make, the Torah is trying to make by separating these two things. And finally we get to Unit 7. The Unit 7 is the Parsha of the Mitonanim. Vayihi ha'am ki mitonanim. The Bnei Yisrael were like mitonanim, those looking to find an excuse. Right? Remember we said excuse seekers. Ra baznei Hashem, which was bad in God's ears. Vayishma Hashem, Hashem heard. Vayichar apo, and his anger burned. Vativ arbam eish Hashem, and the anger of Hashem, the fire of Hashem burned. Vatochal b'ktzei malcha, and it consumed at the edge of the camp. Vayitzak ha'am el Moshe, the nation called out to Moshe. Vayipalel Moshe Hashem, Hashem prayed to God. Vatishka eish, the fire sank. Vayikrashem makomahu Tavera. They called this place Tavera. Why? Ki ba'ara bam Hashem. This is where the ba'ara bam, it burned against them. The fire of God burned against them. That's the first part of what goes on here. Again, 3 psukim describing Bnei Yisrael complaining. It doesn't say what they complained about. It just says that they complained. And it says there was a fire that burned in the outskirts of the camp. They prayed for it, and they prayed that it go away, and it went away. Then, the Erev Rav, the mixed group of people who followed them out of through the desert and out of Egypt. Hitavu tava, they had a desire. Vayushuvu, and they continued. Vayibchu, they went back to crying. Vayushuvu, Vayichu b'nei Yisrael. Bnei Yisrael went back and cried as well. Vayurim, they said, Mi yachilenu basar, who's going to feed us meat? Zacharnu tadaga, we remember the fish. Asher nachal Mitzrayim chinam, that we ate in Mitzrayim for free. Etakishuim, the leeks, the cucumbers, v'avdachim, and the melons, v'chatzir, the leek, v'abitzalim, the onions, v'rashum, and the garlic. All those great things we had for free. Ve'atan avshenu yevesha, right? Our souls are dried out. Ki ein kol bilti haman einu. We can only look to our eyes only look to the man. The haman, and the man was kizera gadhu. It was like coriander seed. It was like I don't remember this anymore. Kizera gadhu was like some kind of seed. Ve'eino kein avadok, looked like coriander. Right, basically it was small around, and it was kind of like a pale white. Shatu ha'am, the nation spread out. V'laktu, and they gathered up tachanu b'reichaim, and they ground it up in a mill. Odaku b'madocha, or they ground it up using a mortar and a pestle and a bowl. Bottom line is they ground it up. Bishlu parur, and they baked it in an oven. Vasu to'ugot, and they made it into a cakes. Vayatamo tam lishat Hashem, and it was like an oil. It was like dough fried in oil. Uvaredet hatal al machaneh, and when the dew came down onto the camp, lila at night, yered haman alav, the man would fall down upon the dew, and that is how they received the man. So we have here, just looking through the text, so first we start off again with the first round of complaining right here. And then we're not really told what they complained about. Then we have the second round of complaining, and the complaint is twofold. It's miyachilenu basar, we want meat, and zacharnu, we remembered hadaga, etc. So we remember all these things that were great for us in Mitzrayim. And part 3 is the fact that, right, elaman einenu, that we can only look to the man. That was the 3 parts of their complaint. And then we have the description of the man. We have basically we have the shape, we have the appearance, we have the color, we have the way it was prepared. That's the third thing we learn about. We have number 4, we have the taste, and number 5, we have the delivery of the man. 5 things we learn about the man. So the question we asked was, what exactly is going on here? Are they really complaining about food? Are they complaining about something else? What's going on here exactly? So what we came up with, we saw from Rashi, is that the Bnei Yisrael here weren't really complaining about food. They were using food as an excuse to try to get out of service of God, to try to get out of the mitzvot, to try to go back to the way it was before they had religion. And we saw this point. The first thing Rashi points out is the fact that the phrase mitonanim means a pretext, an excuse. They were looking for an excuse. The second thing Rashi points out is the fact that they say, we remember the fish that we had in Mitzrayim chinam for free. Rashi says chinam wasn't free. They were slaves. They were servants. No one's giving them free food. So Rashi says, what does free mean? Ma'u omer chinam chinam in hamitzvot. It means free from mitzvot. We didn't want the mitzvot. That's what we want. We don't want to be free of mitzvot. Again, that same theme. And finally, mi yachilenu basar. Who will feed us meat? What do you mean he will feed us meat? They came out of Mitzrayim with all this cattle, with all these cows. They had sheep and cattle. That's exactly where they get meat from. Rather, again, the answer was they were seeking an excuse. They were seeking a pretext. Again, so 3 proofs that Rashi has that that really Bnei Yisrael weren't really complaining about the food itself. Rather, they were looking for an excuse to get out of mitzvot. Again, the fact that the word mitonim means looking for an excuse. The fact that they were saying that the food in Mitzrayim was free when clearly it wasn't free. It must mean free from mitzvot. And the third one is the fact that they were complaining for meat. Clearly, there shouldn't have been a problem considering they had sheep and cattle. So it must mean that they were just looking for an excuse. And finally, the last thing we're going to review is, well, what exactly was it about religion that they wanted to get away from? Is there clues in the Psukim? Are there clues in the Psukim that would help us understand that? We said, yes, there are. What are those clues in the Psukim? So the first thing that we saw was the fact that they mentioned all these different foods, right? What do they mention? They mention, right, kishuim, avtachim, chatzir, betzalim, and shumin. Why not just say we missed the food from Mitzrayim? Why mention 5? Why does the Torah have to mention 5 different types of food? Because what do those 5 different types of food represent? They represent variety. They represent choice. And this is what Bnei Yisrael we're not really so keen on about religion. Religion makes you feel like you don't have choice. It takes away your sense of freedom. They were saying, yes, Mitzrayim was a place of no mitzvot. Mitzrayim was a place of selection. That's what all these different foods represent. So he said that was one way in which the Torah taught us that. The second way was in the description of the man. Right? The man is described as being very routine. Okay? It had a very boring shape and a very boring color. Kizera Gadhu. It was Ke'ain Habidolach. It was just this boring white. Right? When they prepared it, there's only one way they prepared it. They made it into cakes. Nothing exciting. It tasted like fried oil and dough. They only had one flavor to it, despite what it says in the Midrashim. And also, it was delivered as part of nature, right? As part of it came with the weather. And the same way that nature in general becomes routine and we stop getting excited by it, so too the man became just part of their routine nature, the routine part of their lives, and they got used to it and they were bored and it wasn't exciting and there was no variety and there wasn't choice. And that was the thing about religion that was really holding them back, which is why they were mitonim, which is why they were trying to run away from Har Sinai earlier. By Yisu'umei Har Hashem, because they just felt that religion was kind of holding them back, and they needed someone to show them the way that religion can actually help bring out the best in you and can help you really have choice. But that's something that they missed and they totally did not understand right away. And actually, there was one more thing that we pointed out in the Psukim, and that was the idea of being influenced. We saw originally that the first time that they complained, it says Vatochal b'ktsei hamachane, at the outskirts of the camp. The second time they complain, it says Asaf Suf Asher B'Kirbo, the Asaf Suf which is among them, which is within the Bnei Yisrael. And we pointed out that there's like a different levels here. The first time is not as bad. The influence is coming externally; it's coming from the outside. So you could say, listen, if the influence is coming from external, I could say, listen, I did something bad, but that wasn't me. It was something else externally from forcing me to do it. But once the Asaf Suf was Asher B'Kirbo was among them, then they stopped realizing that they were actually doing something wrong and something outside was influencing them. They were just complaining, and since it was from within them, they were just being themselves. They didn't realize they were doing something wrong. So we talked about the fact that an influence that comes from within is much worse than an influence that comes from outside. We also talked about the fact that sometimes there's like a transition. An influence might start as being external, but if you let something influence you from the outside, eventually it's going to start influencing you from the inside. Again, the outskirts of the camp becomes a complaint, Asher B'Kirbo, among them. That's basically it. Tomorrow we will discuss in class, or I shouldn't say tomorrow because you're probably going to be watching this tomorrow, but we will discuss in class at some point exactly what you're going to be responsible from each of the units. I will try, if I can, to give you guys a review sheet as well.